to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today, I have the privilege of chatting with a Washington, D.C.-based artist, Katherine Tzu-Lan Mann. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here. And we were chatting beforehand, and I was bridging things. I was making sure that both of those were properly dipped. Now I can actually get to the right questions. Also, for context, just so you know, there are rapid fire questions at the end. So
okay, yeah. I'm ready.
Yeah, just so you know, because people get the nerves. It's like, oh no, I thought we were good. I thought we were friends. Now Rob's attacking me with questions.
I'll see if I can hold my own.
All right, I'm sure you can. So I want to start off with those who are undipped. Give us those vital stats, and could you introduce yourself? Like, what's your background? I want very brief, but what's your background and the whole thing? How would you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Katherine Tzu-Lan Mann. I'm a painter, a public artist, an installation artist. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I've been based in D.C. for a little bit more than 10 years, about a decade. But I grew up moving around. I moved every 2 or 3 years as a kid. So that kind of comes into my art. And I make very large paintings and installations that are pretty busy and maximalist and luxuriant. A little bit abstract, pretty abstract, but not fully abstract. That's what I do. I'm also a mother of two.
Thank you for sharing. And I like some of the words that you use. I was like, I like that. I like, size, large, got it.
Very large, yes.
So let's go back. What first interested you in making art, and how did you know that art was a career for you? Like those kind of like the in the beginning sort of things for you as on that artistic journey.
So my answer to that is pretty boring. I was one of those kids that I always knew I wanted to be an artist, basically since I can remember. I think that the main journey that I was on, or I've been on, is the realization that it actually is possible to make a living as an artist, to live your life as an artist, to have that be your main thing in life. I worked as a graphic designer for a little while. I've done a lot of teaching. And now I'm a full-time artist. But it's something that I always kind of gravitated towards intuitively. I had this upbringing where I was moving so often. So I think that I had a kind of tenuous sense of home and place, and making art. I would always make these kind of fantastical other worlds, magical other places that you could escape to. And I think it had this place, it had this function of creating a home for myself. So it's something that I've always gravitated towards ever since I was literally a toddler.
So having that sense of home, having that you're making your own like space because of like you were touching on the size. So going with that is like, no, that's really interesting. Like, so in traveling and having so many different spaces that are home for a brief period of time, did that give you any like added perspective and added like visuals of like, I'm going to add a bit of this influence in what I'm doing. I'm going to have a bit of that influence in what I'm doing.
So the work that I make now, I think it does. That kind of background is just unconsciously always going to be in the work. And my work is very fragmented and very much a hybrid. There's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of incongruous elements kind of smashing up against one another. Sure. So I think that that's definitely coming from that background. As a kid, I don't think that that's where I was thinking. I was just kind of trying to survive, trying to live my life. As an expat, I was mostly living in Asia. I'd moved between Asia and the United States and kind of back and forth. I lived in Korea, in Beijing, China, in Guangzhou, China, and Taipei. I went to high school in Israel. And then I'd also come back to the DC area a lot. So I think what I was trying, the type of art that I was making as a kid, I don't know, who knows why kids make the art that they make. It's just it's a magical language that only children have access to.
Sure.
And that I've now lost as an adult. But I look at the work that I make now, and you can tell, at least for me, that it's coming from a place of fragmentation and fracture, and maybe a joy in that. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be fragmented.
Because I was reading that kind of that collision with what you were describing there a moment ago of the Eastern and Western influences in some of your work, and kind of talking about, as you were saying a moment ago, I think we backdoored into what my next question was, which is great. I was like, so when you first started, how has it changed? I think you just described it, actually. It's like, I'm realizing now versus when I was like younger, this was the type of art I was doing, however that art may have been. Now this is where I'm doing that kind of maybe speaks to that collision or that kind of bringing together of Eastern and Western influences.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating to me to look at the kind of work that artists made when they were kids. Yeah. Or when they were teenagers or as young adults, that when you were just kind of making stuff, you didn't really know why. And then as an adult, you look back and the same interests and influences are there. Mm-hmm. So that kind of interest in escapism, that was definitely there when I was a kid, and it's still there now. It's just not something that I can escape from.
I like that little turn of phrase there. I mean, like when I go back, when I was younger, I did some art stuff. I was illustrator, drawing, did comics and stuff like that. And I thought that comic book artist would be my path. So that notion of, can you make money in doing this? And I just remember my parents were very like, I don't know, maybe business. Maybe you should do business. So that language, that creative language for me, it wasn't in illustration anymore. It was in always something creative. It went to writing. It went to, I guess, what I'm doing now, podcasting and doing it artfully and curating and things of that nature. But I returned to the comic stuff, but just in a different way. Now I'm writing comics versus trying to draw them. And they're ridiculous. They're just cat comics. I'll share them with you later.
I've got to see it.
But I think you're right that some of those elements you can't really escape. Like, this is what I was into as a kid, and now as an adult, having that time and that experience, I still am able to occasionally ping back on what I did as a kid, but with that awareness of an adult.
Right. Yes, that's exactly what I was trying to express. I think that's something that's really beautiful. Is that I feel like a lot of artists or a lot of students, when you're thinking about what it means to be an artist, people kind of assume that you have to conceptualize everything and have a reason that's really thought out conceptually for every single thing that you do. And sometimes it can just be a unconscious intuition, and that's okay. Yeah. So I like that.
Thank you. So I want to talk about materials and process. Could you speak on the significance of the materials that you use, and could you walk us through what your process is in very general terms? Because I imagine that it will be different, project to project or piece to piece. So please.
Well, not different. I mean, I'm not like one of those artists that changes from one project to another. I'm working on lace in one section, like one project, and then I'm moving to metal welding or something like that.
That would be wild.
Not me. I mean, I really respect people who are able to work that way. Yeah. But my work and the concepts, I guess, around my work are so tied to the material that the material does remain kind of constant. Mm-hmm. And that material is always paper, almost always paper, unless it's a big public piece. I'm generally working on paper. I use a lot of different kinds of papers, synthetic papers like Yupo paper, which is like a plasticky kind of material, mm-hmm. or watercolor paper or rice paper a lot of the time. And the reason why I'm very wedded to paper. So I was originally trained as a teenager. I lived in Taiwan for a while, and I'm half Taiwanese. Half my family lives in Taiwan. So I'd go back to Taiwan in summers, even when I wasn't living in Taiwan. And I studied under a traditional Sumi ink master, like traditional Chinese painting.
Yeah.
So that's how I first really learned how to paint, was by making these Sumi ink on rice paper studies of chrysanthemums and bamboo and cherry blossoms, like very traditional Chinese motifs, repeated over and over and over again. It's like a very specific way of studying and learning this art form. And that's always kind of stayed with me as like what painting is.
Yeah. Painting
is paper and ink. And now I work with paper and ink and acrylic. But there's always Sumi ink in almost all of the paintings that I do. It's always on paper. And I start out every painting by pouring diluted inks or diluted acrylics onto the paper as it lays on the floor of the studio. So it's essentially like a big puddle on the floor. It's a chance operation. It's something that I don't have control over, really. Yeah. Sometimes my kids do it for me. It's just like creating a mark, and creating a mark that is made by forces of nature, gravity, evaporation, rather than the artist's hand. And that eventually dries over days often. Yeah. And it leaves these very beautiful marks. And I use that as the kind of scaffold or the skeleton that I then build the rest of the painting around. I'm sorry if you can hear my kids. I told them to be quiet.
We're good. We're good here. I mean, they're like, look, we want to be credited. You're saying we're pouring it sometimes. We want to be credited. Come on now. Come on,
That's
Mom.
True. I mean, my kids were recently in their first show. Like, talk about like privilege. They were a friend of mine curated a show of artists and their kids, with the kids at the forefront in a small museum in Virginia. So my kids can already say they've been in a museum show.
Well, wait till that CV comes out. Wait till those kids' CV comes out. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, and they're 5 and 7, so it's pretty early start.
Yes, the virtuosos. It's like, and thank you for sharing that. That's, I mean, when you mentioned that you're how you view like painting and how you view like, I guess the beginning of your work, your take on it is like under, working with a master. That's huge. And carrying on like a tradition, because now I'm interested in it. Like, so how can I learn? Just give out these classes. What we doing?
I feel very lucky that I was able to study under this guy as a 15, 16-year-old. And now going back to one of your questions about how the work has changed, that has been a journey for me of this connection to this very ancient practice and a very traditional practice, and how much, specifically reads as Asian, that type of painting, how much I embrace that in my work and how much I have shied away from it. That has been a journey for me. So I'm half Asian and half white, and learning to embrace that part of myself, the fact that I am an Asian artist, that's not something that I need to hide or, pretend is not the case. Yeah. That's been a long journey for me. So I had a period where I refused to put any bamboo into the paintings. And if somebody said, "Oh, your work looks so Asian," I would be very offended. And now I'm coming back around to a place where I realize that the work is autobiographical, and it can be an assertion of myself and of my Asianness. And that's not something to try to hide away from the world. But that's been a long, long journey for me. I'm still on it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because I think at times people want certain things are about identity, and sometimes we have to kind of diminish what that identity might look like or what have you. And there may be times where I'll interview someone. It's like, hey, you got a lot of black artists. I was like, well, I am a black person, and that's baked in of what my interests would be. But I feel like I can talk with anyone, and it's not solely that, but I'm not going to diminish my blackness or any identity that I relate to or that I am a part of. And I think that is a journey. And I think over the last few years, really embracing that piece for me has been important. So thank you for sharing that.
I think it's the thing that a lot of artists of color do grapple with, because, at the once you want to be true to yourself and your work, and then at the same time, you're working in this art world that wants to exotify you, that wants to, only see you as an Asian artist, and then put you into a pigeonhole you. So it's really hard trying to figure out how to navigate that. It's traumatic at times.
Yes. And I have to confront it when people start to know who you are, you're getting the things. It's like, oh, wow, it's like, who's the artist? Who's the person doing this? I guess it's just a black podcast. I guess this is just an Asian painter, what have you. It's just like,
right. And
do you like the work? That's at the end of the day. Like, what do you appreciate about the work? What do you enjoy about the work? Or what is your take on the work? Not necessarily the person, because you almost want to do that blind taste test sort of thing sometimes, just to get like a true sense because of that pigeonholing nature you were describing.
Right. Yeah.
So this was a question that was an interesting one that we talked about a little bit. So what are the things going through your head when you decide to kind of group images together from many quote unquote like failed paintings? I've read that in a quote a while back. And do you use to use in a particular painting to achieve hybridity? So in bringing together like different images or what have you, tell me about that in achieving hybridity.
So I was describing how I start the paintings, right?
Sure.
So it's paper, it's laying on the floor of the studio, I'm pouring paint. And that's kind of the beginning of almost every painting. And the thing about pouring diluted paint on the floor and letting it dry is it's like inherently beautiful. Like it could be the finished painting just there, and many artists would leave it there. And there's a history of Western art where artists have just left it there, like Morris Louis or Jackson Pollock, just making that kind of motion, that a physical gesture, and then allowing that to speak for itself. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the chance operation, but I'm also interested in confusing that, not only having the beauty of this physical gesture, but also adding in my own control and interest in detail and interest in decoration, and symbols, like from this kind of personal lexicon that I've developed over the years. So I never just leave that pour. I build back onto it, and I try to put in whatever I think is kind of the opposite of the language that I used first. So the first step of a painting is this poured paint. So that is kind of natural, physical. And I want to then add on something that feels kind of the opposite of that. So inorganic, maybe rigidity on top of the fluidity. And when you try to combine those things together, it doesn't work a lot of the time. So I kind of liken the lifespan of these paintings as they go through, like they start out as babies and they have so much potential and they're so cute. And then they go through this like awkward teenager phase and they're just looks so awkward. and there's like a lot of things that are wrong, because that's kind of what I'm interested in as an artist, is having this process where I'm combining things that feel like they don't belong. That's kind of the whole point. Yeah. Grids with puddles of water, highly detailed drawings of flowers next to those grids, and seeing how they kind of smash together. So I think every painting inherently has hundreds of failed paintings under the surface of every layer of paint until it's no longer a failed painting, hopefully.
Thank you. That clears it up, because I was like, I am fumbling on this question here, but that definitely clears it up. So thank you. Let me see what this podcast is about. Is providing that extra insight. Like, look, I've read this. What does this mean? Now listeners. So I got a few more before we get into those rapid fire ones. And again, the rapid fire questions, all the goodwill that I'm establishing with you, right?
Oh,
I just ruin all of it. That's what happens ultimately. And from your vantage point, and we can go as deep as you like on this one, but from your vantage point, what is the traditional definition of American art, and how is that definition perhaps evolving?
So I had a hard time with that question, because I don't really know what the definition of art is, and especially not the definition of American art. I think that to me, at least,
sure,
what the definition of art is if the artist says that it's art, then therefore it's art. If you've made something and you've called it art, then it's art. And I think that's kind of the best definition for art that there can be. I think it probably should be made by you. I don't think that you could just point to, I don't know, all the phone booths in London and say that that's art.
That's my art. What are you talking about? That is my art specifically.
Maybe your art would be the statement, actually. I guess you could say the statement of claiming all of those as your own could be the art. Well, now I'm just going in circles.
No, I love it. I love it, though. I love it. It's a version of, it's a BS artist move. I love it. See, another thing.
I mean, that's kind of the beauty of art, is that BS is inherent in everything that we do. And that's okay. And we're going to embrace that. I mean, so much of what I do, I think I'm a pretty traditional artist, really. Mm-hmm. When I'm making paintings, they go on walls. It's pretty two-dimensional. Usually I do move into installation spaces, but it still is pretty wall-based or plane-based.
Sure.
So I'm not going to claim that I'm expanding what art is. But I think that what I can say is that I'm expanding a place for myself, for people like me who feel like they are fragmented people, who feel like they don't fit anywhere, and making a place for a home, as we were describing, a home for myself within the history of art. I look at a lot of, I actually consider myself, I talk about myself as a landscape painter, even though the paintings look very abstract. And I look at a lot of the history of Western landscape painting and then Chinese landscape painting. And as an American biracial woman, I often have a hard time finding myself in either of those canons. And so I'm kind of creating a place for myself and anybody else who feels like they don't fit, that they don't kind of belong within these paintings. So that's kind of what I'm going for.
And that's where the evolution is happening. I mean, a lot of these spaces or what have you that people are creating in and making their art in, I ask people on occasion before they hear me talk and all of that stuff from this vantage point, when you think of a podcaster, what pops in your mind? Close your eyes, what pops in your mind? Mm-hmm. And I was the same thing applies to people in their practices, whether it be traditional, like visual art, whether it be audio, whether it be sculpture, what have you, what pops in your mind? Because going back to one of the previous comments, we attach the person's identity with it. And what does a painter look like? Anyone. And I think that's where that evolution is coming from, because there are more voices and more perspectives that are broader in these areas.
Yeah. So I'm more interested in that expansion within art than than expanding the definition of art, because at least to me, the definition of art is pretty expanded.
Yeah. Is this art? Sure. Yes. Yes, it is. So I got a couple more, and I think this one is is interesting because as you touched on earlier, your collaborators, you say your mom, and I want to like get your feedback on how you balance and have time to create, and do you set time? Do you build it in? How do you kind of have time to create while balancing like life and responsibilities and things of the sort?
Yeah, that's so hard. I think that's one of the things that artists don't talk people don't talk about the most around having an art practice. You know, it's not romantic. It's super practical, and it's really difficult. Yeah, so I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and just like everybody else, I went through 2 years of the pandemic and homeschooling and not just being at home with these little tornadoes of energy all day. And it was really, really tough. I'm privileged that I have a partner who can help support that. I'm married to a writer, so he also was working at home, and we would just kind of switch on and off. One of us would be taking care of the kids, and the other would be working. And so then we never saw one another, but we got our work done. And a lot of injury was taken by that. But I think that's the case for everybody who just went through the past 2 years the way we all did. So during the like height of the pandemic, during homeschool time, I was working at night, basically. Mm-hmm. So I'd be homeschooling. I didn't want to be homeschooling. I was being forced to homeschool because there was no school. It was not a choice for me. But I'd be, being a kindergarten student all day long, and then going to the studio at like 6 p.m. and staying there until midnight. So, that's 6 hours. Not as much sleep as I would like, but I was able to get a fair amount, like more work done during the pandemic than I thought, at some cost to myself and my family for sure. But it's always, we're still trying to find that right balance. And if anybody else is able to figure out what the correct proportion is, then please let me know.
I dig it. So this is the last real question that I have for you before we get to those rapid fire questions. Can you share with me your proudest moment as an artist?
So that was another question that I had a difficult time with.
That's all I have, the hard-hitting, difficult questions.
It's hard to say. Whenever someone asks me what my favorite painting is, it's always the most recent painting. Yeah. Like whatever is happening right now is always the most important and the most interesting thing. Yeah. So that's a given. But I'd say one really recent highlight that I was very proud of was I was curated into a group show at the Krieger Museum, mm-hmm. which is a small museum in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., with all local artists and people that I really admired and was proud to be showing with. And they gave me the chance to make a giant installation that was like 50 feet long. So that was super.
That's really cool.
Whenever I get an opportunity to make something really big, that's also like that's a highlight in the career. Like if I have 100 feet to deal with, then I'm happy. So like any chance of those, I feel like working large for me, it's like, I want to make something that is epic and immersive, that feels like it can kind of take over the space and take over you as the viewer. So any chance I have to do something like that, I consider that a big success.
Hell yeah. Thank you. So I got 3 quick rapid fire questions, and as brief as you can. This is what we want to do with these. So the first one, and I hope you're ready.
Okay.
If your artwork were music, what would it sound like? What would be the genre?
Oh my God.
I know. See, I told you, people are like, come on, man.
I don't know. Oh, if my artwork were music, what would the genre be?
Or what would it sound like? You know, because I think that makes it a little easier, maybe.
I feel, oh my God, that's so hard.
See, again, hard-hitting questions.
I think it would sound like pop music. Probably, okay. Which makes it sound like my work is super vanilla or banal. No. But I actually think that like pop music right now, it is so much about combining influences. That's like, that's something that has been embraced so much by, just the top 40 people. Mm-hmm. And pop music is also unapologetically pleasant and lovely to listen to and beautiful. Uh-huh. I think my work is also unapologetically beautiful. Like it's supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to be nice to look at, and I'm not going to apologize for that.
See, you made it seem like it was hard. I was like, I know she's going to say pop music. I'm just waiting for you to say, I knew it. I was just like, and then you said like combining these things, different info. I was like, look.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know I was going to say pop music.
It's those 80s babies things. That's just what it is.
I mean, it's like embarrassing to say that because if it's pop music, then it must not be very thoughtful or intelligent, right? Like, but actually, I don't think that's even true. So yeah, I'm going to stand by it. Pop music.
I'm here for it. I've become very interested in reflection. So how do you feel when you're like, when you've gotten to that point where you're like, I finished the product, I'm here, this project is finished. How do you feel? What's that feeling for you when you've completed your work?
That's when I've completed a painting, I feel unsure if I've actually completed the painting. I think that's the main insecurity and nervousness and not being certain if the painting is actually finished, because these pieces go through so many lives, as we've described, the failed paintings within the paintings.
Yes.
Sometimes it is kind of hard to decide this is actually, you need to stop. I also, the work that I make is very full. It's very busy. It's very maximalist. So I could keep on going forever. Yeah. So sometimes I have to kind of force myself to not do that. So there is definitely not like this shining moment where the heavens open up and angels sing and the painting is complete. It's more like this kind of halting, skidding,
like slow. Like, hey, Katherine, we have another 100 feet for you. It's like, I should keep going.
Yes.
All right, so this is the last question that I have, and this one should be probably the briefest one, because I think we tend to overthink it or have you, and I know I would. How do you rediscover inspiration when you are feeling creatively dry? Is it an activity that you do? Do you go through previous works? What is part of that process of kind of re-dipping and re-engaging?
At least for the last few years, one of my main go-tos when I feel that way, and I feel that way all the time, probably every day, is I look at Buddhist painting. I'm really inspired by ancient Buddhist cave painting specifically. So I've been lucky enough to visit, there are these caves in China near the city called Dunhuang. It's in the Gobi Desert. Mm-hmm. They're called the Mogao Caves. They have centuries and centuries of Buddhist painting within hundreds and hundreds of caves along a cliff in the middle of the Gobi Desert. And when you go into these caves, they're just floor, ceiling, walls, completely filled with narrative, decorative, and repetitive Buddhist painting alongside these amazing sculptures. And when I look at those, I also recently, my brother lives in Sri Lanka, and I went to visit him a couple of weeks ago. And that's also a Buddhist country. And there's a temple in a cave there called Dambula, mm-hmm. Which is the same. I got to visit that, and it was the same ecstatic immersion in another world. And that's what I want from all art, really, and especially my own. So I go back and look at those images whenever I'm feeling creatively dry.
Well, thank you. You're off the hot seat. You did very well. You did very well.
I tried. That music question.
I was waiting for you to say I feel great after I'm never creatively dry. I've never lost. No losses. I was waiting for that. That'd be great. So, one, I want to thank you for coming onto this podcast. This has been a lot of fun. It's been great to learn more about you and your work, and just your background. It's been fun. And two, I want to
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really great talking to you too.
Thank you. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks, the listeners, where to check you out, more of your work, and all of that good stuff. Feel free to plug away.
Well, I'm so bad at this. You can find me online. My website is katherinemann.net. I'm also on Instagram. You just Google my name. You can find me. I'm about to have a solo show in San Francisco in May at Dolby Chadwick Gallery. So that's what I'm working towards right now. So anybody in San Francisco, I'd love to see you there.
So there you have it, folks. Again, I want to thank Katherine Tzu-Lan Mann. Why did I sound like a rapper for a second? Katherine Tzu-Lan Mann for coming on to the podcast. And I'm saying that there is art in and around your city. You just have to look for it.